And in the second point about the unconscious drivers, this round into attachment patterns. Now, this is really important because attachment is really the foundation of relating, right? And it's not just anxious, avoidant, that's all done. It goes deeper than that, because really our attachment is how the blueprint that we have inside our minds, right? Inside our nervous systems of how love should happen. Whether how we should give love and how we should receive love. And what I have to say is, for most men, our attachment systems are broken, seriously broken, right? Because we grew up in households where no love was given to us, right? By our mothers or our fathers, or it was very conditional, right? Or it didn't feel safe to get love, right? There's just some examples out there. Or it was inconsistent, right? For instance, where maybe you, could be loved 1 minute and then you could be beaten the next minute, right? You had this real seesaw. Or you didn't feel that it was safe for you to ask what you needed and get the love you wanted. And it doesn't necessarily mean you had an abusive household. It doesn't. Because our little minds, our little brains like to focus on, put a lot of attention on what went wrong. So you can have a really good childhood for the most part, right? I've got a lot of men that come to work with me and they've had very good childhoods. Their parents are reasonably rich and wealthy. And, you know, when I say reasonably, they're, you know, middle class. They go to good universities and good colleges. They have another sibling or two. You know, their parents are together or divorced in a reasonably amicable way. And they are terrified of commitment, right? Or they are the opposite and they are always trying to get into relationships too quickly. Or they're terrified of being too close to someone and not being accepted. Or they're afraid of not being good enough, right? But if you look at it on the surface, their lives have been pretty good, right? They've been fine. Their childhoods are fine. But the mind, the way the brain works, the way our nervous system works, it remembers the difficult moments and we create a story around it, right? That's not always the case of what it is. And this can impact our attachment. You know, like me, I often say is I felt my dad was very cold. I felt my mum was quite cold at times as well. And if you met my mum now, you wouldn't be like, well, what are you talking about, David? That's not how your mum is. But my little brain, my little nervous system remembers the times that the coldness was there and has latched on and created a story that was the whole thing. We very rarely remember the really wonderful and beautiful moments. They're like, we call the 10 out of 10 good. And we don't remember much of the kind of 7, 6, 5 kind of out of 10 good, but we remember the like -10, right? The difficult times, the really painful times, the times that your parents neglected you, they forgot to pick you up from school, they made you feel like your emotions and feelings weren't welcome, they screamed at you for something small. You remember those, and those become the reality of your childhood for a lot of you, or at least the reality of your childhood for your nervous system. You might consciously remember it being all happy-go-lucky and rainbows, right? So the attachment starts to make a really big impact here, because it's what forms what we believe love should feel like, what relationships should feel like. So you've got the attachment that we experience with our mother and father. And then you have what you observe of their relationship, right? Like what their relationship is like. You get an idea of like, oh, this is how mum is and how her dad is, blah, blah, blah. And then you have a bit of a judgment around that. Like, I don't want to be like my dad, or I don't want to be like my mum, or I don't want a relationship like them, right? This all kind of shapes into the attachment. And then the thinking we have about relationships. And these patterns, the attachment patterns, shape what feels chemically correct for us, chemically right for us, not consciously, right? Not cognitively, right? Chemically, subconsciously right to us. So the familiar patterns that our nervous system believes are how relationships should feel. And I was digging into this before we jumped on. I did a little bit of research. And there's 3 statements here that I see a lot, and they kind of tally with what I've seen already. In that, what I see, avoidant attached men disproportionately are attracted to emotionally unavailable or inconsistent partners. I see this a lot with avoidant men I work with. They're attracted to unavailable partners because they're just out of reach, and it's quite exciting, right? But usually one of their parents, father or mother, was emotionally unavailable, right? They couldn't quite connect. They didn't quite get the love and the care and the tenderness they desired. So that becomes a familiar pattern. That becomes the pattern that's installed in their nervous system of, this is what love is like. The other person is slightly unavailable. And this might sound strange to some of you, like, oh, but aren't avoidant people the ones that are unavailable? Now, it might seem like that, right? But like I said, I've worked with, hundreds now, probably, avoidant men in the last few years. And what always the same story they tell me is this: a lot of the women that they really like, me, I'll use myself as an example. A lot of the women that I really liked didn't like me back. Right? This is a very common thing in dating because there's just the general nature of two humans trying to align. But avoidant men's experience is often that they're quite attracted to the women who are emotionally unavailable. And part of that is because they mirror their own internal emotional unavailability, but also it mirrors what's familiar to them from their childhood relationships, right? And then when you get into this cycle, it's very easy for you to believe all women are emotionally unavailable, or all the women are attracted emotionally unavailable, right? You hear people say that quite often, right? Secondly, and this is not about avoidant men, this is about anxious attachment. The research also shows that anxious attached men are pulled towards partners who will trigger uncertainty for them and for them to need to pursue. Fascinating, isn't it? That we're attracted to the very thing that actually we don't like. Why? Because that's what we experienced when we were young. That's what our bodies, our muscle memory, our nervous system memory has. This is what love is like. Yeah, it's not this kind of conscious like, oh, I know what love is. Love is this, this, and this, and we chase that. And there's an element we can override it, right? But especially when we are just following what's attraction, right? Like, oh, I have to be with someone I'm attracted to. I hear this a lot from people. When we don't realize that much of our attraction is really fucking bullshit, right? Much of what our attraction is dysfunction, is recreating familiar patterns that we actually don't want or like. And then the third part of this attachment piece is that what often happens is that a secure person will feel very boring or flat to someone with an insecure attachment style and to their nervous system. So if you're anxiously attached or you're avoidantly attached, someone who is securely attached, good communication, good with boundaries, happy with distance, happy with closeness, isn't desperate for a relationship, isn't running away, that sort of thing. Someone who's securing themselves, securing relationships will feel boring to you. They'll feel boring because it's not triggering your attachment system. Your attachment system doesn't flare up. You don't have this chemistry and this excitement and this attraction. You just have this, like when they die in movies on what do they call that machine? I don't know. That machine that goes down like this. I was watching Stranger Things recently. If any of you watching Stranger Things, give me a little shout in the comments. Where Max was almost dead, in the final season. Sorry if that's a spoiler for you. That little thing, the heart monitor thing, right? It feels flat and boring. When actually what a lot of us are moving towards, right, is we want something that's doing this constantly, which is that, what's it called? When someone's like their heart beatings is really fast, like, you're panting, you've just been running, your heart rate is really high. That is what attracts us because it feels exciting. It feels like, oh God, this is my person. I feel attracted to this person. When actually that might just be your childhood experience of love and what it felt like to be loved and not loved. Or you might want these people it's like this, dead, and so forth. And that's what love feels like to you. So you gravitate towards that. And there's another piece of thing here. This all comes from some research I looked up. Research consistently shows that people rate partners, you got to really listen to this, people rate partners more attractive when they recreate the emotional conditions from early attachment experiences. Right? When even when those conditions are painful, neglectful, or hurtful, we find people more attractive if they recreate the emotional conditions for us from our childhood. Isn't that fucked up? Because most people, like most of us, didn't necessarily have what we call happy childhoods. And what do I mean by that? We don't remember them being particularly happy, or our nervous system doesn't remember them being particularly happy, right? Not as like a general thing, but remember the unhappy parts. As I said, we remember the difficult parts because we're trying to shield ourselves away from those happening again. And then we also partly install those as how love should be.